the Chicago Film and Lover Exchange, and today we're going to be talking about Arrival, which is directed by Denis Villeneuve. Hopefully I got that right. Yeah, this is part 2 of our 3-part series where we're talking about films from 2016. And part 1, we talked about Certain Women, directed by Kelly Reichardt, this time Arrival. And the next one we're going to be talking about Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins. So I want to give a shout out to Armando Maggi because he's now the head organizer of Chicago Film and Lover Exchange, and it's his birthday today. So
hey, happy birthday, Armando!
Happy birthday, Armando! But I'd love my co-hosts to introduce themselves. Let's start with Dave.
I'm Dave Clingerman. I'm also part of the Film Punch podcast and the Chicago Film Lover Exchange. I co-organize that with Angela Shershin and Rebecca.
And what's Film Punch about?
Film Punch is watch a movie and then do a podcast on it immediately afterwards, so we get that film.
That initial
reaction.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Hi, I'm Mary Brown, and I'm a member of the Chicago Film Lovers Exchange. And I'm a huge science fiction fan, and I love science fiction because it provides the means by which we can step back from ourselves and observe and examine the human condition.
That's well put.
Hello, I'm Al. I'm the organizer of the Chicago Film Discussion Meetup group, and I am co-host of an online podcast called The Directors Club, where twice a month we go and take a look at the films of a particular director and look through their whole filmography. And it can be super cool when you see the different kinds of connections and themes that come up when you look at the director's whole body of work. We just have one coming up, which has Rebecca on, where we're talking about the films of, that's right, the films of Sofia Coppola. Should be appearing very, very soon, so you can find that at the Directors Club Podcast on iTunes and directorsclubpodcast.com.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll tell a quick summary of Arrival before we get started in the discussion. So Arrival's the main character is Louise Banks, played by Amy Adams, and she is a professor in languages. And in the beginning of the movie, we see that 12 unidentified objects have landed across the world. And Louise is contacted because they don't know what the aliens are saying. So they figure that she has some insight. And when they bring her to the one that's in Montana, which is interesting because the last film we talked about had to deal with Montana, but she meets Ian, who is played by Jeremy Renner, who's a scientist. So both of them are like the 2 top people that they needed to communicate with the aliens and understand what's going on. And so that's the general summary. Like the last film, Certain Women, I want to touch about why this film is so important in 2016. So if we were going to put 2016 in a time capsule, what would Arrival be telling us, years from now? Who wants to get us started? Does anybody have thoughts?
I mean, one of the things that you think about when you think about 2016 that you can get out of the Arrival for me is it's really a nice discussion and exploration of the value of communication. Like just the need for people to go and try to reach an understanding for others whose viewpoint and perspectives could be just radically different than your own. And it shows just how important it is to try and reach that, no matter how difficult that could be.
Right.
And the mutual enlightenment that can come from that connection. Yes, and the self-discovery that two people, 2 cultures can have in the process of learning that language and the insight that can bring.
Dave?
I remember when I originally watched it, it was not long after the election, and it felt like a movie that was written before all of these things happened, with the inflammatory radio and things like that. That was sort of it felt like it was from a different time.
Mm-hmm.
Very prescient.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It came out was it right after the election?
I
Or was
don't remember exactly. But I know I watched it shortly after.
Yeah, I remember that too. Yeah, I mean, I feel like overall this movie is hopeful, I guess, in terms of like where we're at now.
Very much so.
I guess, it can bring encouragement that there can be good in the world. But yeah, so it's a very interesting film for 2016, especially with the whole exploration of language. And
Yeah.
I gotta say, it took me 3 times to watch this film to really understand what they were talking about. And I know that sounds weird, but my brain is very linear. Like, I'm like A to Z, And when you're like making things all not linear, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, it really stressed me out, like the whole thing about the daughter. And I'm like, what? She knew this, but then she didn't tell, her husband that this was going to happen, and she let it happen. Like, I had a hard time grasping all that. And I think this final time that I really, grasped it. What do you guys think about the non-linear plot?
I loved it, and it shows how inextricable the future, present, and past is, especially in the scene near the end when the General Shang whispers into Louise's ear what his wife's final words were, and then in the present, Louise calls General Shang and relays those words, very words to him as they come to her in cognition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was that whole non-linear time thing has always interested me. I read Slaughterhouse-Five when I was in high school.
Okay.
And a lot of the class were just like, what? I don't know, huh?
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow, that's so cool. I hadn't really thought of that before.
Yeah, so remind me, I think I might have read that book, but it's been so long. What's the non-linear?
Aliens in that don't experience time linearly.
Okay.
And they know that at some point in the future, one of them destroys the universe. And they're like, well, why don't you do something about it so you know what happens? And they don't understand that.
Right.
Because that's what happens.
Uh-huh.
So I kind of applied the same thing to Arrival.
Okay.
Where, she knows this is going to happen, but it's just the way it happens.
Mm-hmm.
She says that she had a choice, but I'm not sure she really did.
Yeah, again, that took a 3rd viewing for me.
I think it's super cool actually that you had that particular experience by needing to see it a couple of times, because in that way it kind of mirrors the journey of the main character. Right? When you can observe a movie quite differently when you're first watching it and you don't know what'll happen, and then when you see the movie again and you then have that foreknowledge, your perspective totally changes. Well, that's what Amy Adams' character goes through. She puts in a position where she knows how things will turn out, and she has to make decisions based on that.
Right.
So your interpretation also changes in a similar way. And I mean, that's also one of the really cool things that the movie does, I think, is about how it gives like the impressions that people have in their own heads. And for one thing, it shows how people's their memories, they don't quite work like VHS or cassettes. If you remember something when you're 10, you don't have to go through all the memories of when you're 20 or 15, right? It's more like a DVD player on infinite randomness that you can just jump back and forth on things, right? And it also shows there's a kind of unique kind of connection of how people visualize their dreams and their memories, and there's some just really interesting way, and I think movies kind of can be a gateway to how that does that,
Yeah.
And that's one of the real fun things the movie does. It gets you this one perspective that when you see these images from Amy Adams' life, and you think that those actions are something that's happened, right? But instead, those are her actions that she's doing in the movie are coming from stuff that she knows will happen. And what does that mean for us to be guided by our memories or guided by our premonitions or ideas of what the future could bring, you know?
Yeah, and it was, I think, right after immediate contact that she started thinking about her daughter, and like, and after you've seen it a couple times, you start to realize like, there was a part where she like was somewhere like in the present, like the ship, and then was seeing her daughter putting her boot on, and she's like, "Mommy, help me," and that she's like also doing something else in like the ship, and it's just, first of all, it's freaking brilliant, like in the sense, like I knew this was a good movie, but I just thought it was poorly, like it just, it frustrated me, like a lot of things about it, but now I like, I understand it more.
Well, what the Slaughterhouse-Five that Dave brought up, like Kurt Vonnegut had a really fun phrase to describe the main character and the situation, how he's jumping back and forth through these different places. He said he's become unstuck in time. And I think part of the frustration that you feel and other people feel when they're first watching the movie and they don't quite know what's happening is they also feel this level of unstuck. You don't know where you stand, and the appearance of the aliens is like this, such effectively done as a mystery. You know, they don't have like the way they behave, the way they act, the way they communicate is so different with how like you expect out of, say, maybe more conventional sci-fi like Star Trek, that that you're kind of become like almost at a loss, you know. And I kind of like think, to me, Arrival also works on this kind of Zen way. Like there's a really cool Zen phrase that called like when the student is ready, the master appears, and that's in a way that the aliens show up there, and their arrival is so mysterious and inexplicable, but maybe they were there simply because they need to be there at that exact moment.
Well, that's basically what they say. Like, we're here because we'll need your help in 3,000 years or whatever.
That was the
they're like, this is our time when we should be here, so here we are.
Yeah, I mean, there's that word, the whole thing with the weapon, like that was really interesting to me, because, you know, it's so how we're programmed in our country, just like anything is a threat. Like, we don't think of anything as a benefit, or like, you know, we're always thinking the negative, because we've been programmed like, this is negative, this is negative, this is negative.
Yeah.
So when somebody says the word weapon, like, and that's the thing about language, it's like, in different languages, things mean different things.
Yeah,
so,
there's a Chinese word for, or Chinese character to say crisis, is actually exactly the same as or very similar to the Chinese word that means opportunity. So, boy, that was such an unfortunate mistranslation in the movie to call it a weapon.
Right, Mary?
And also, it showed how literally and exacting we think when they mentioned the word weapon. And Louise was the one voice of intuition in the story, and to her, weapon could have also meant a tool. And eventually she learns that what the aliens offer is actually a gift, the gift of their language, and how intuitive it is, and how intuitive it is, and I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's okay. We were talking about weapons
and that she learns that it's a gift.
Yeah.
She learns that it's a gift, and what an intuitive level the aliens think, and that they don't see time linearly. They see it all non-linearly, and that's symbolized in the circular writing communication that they have.
And another interesting thing about the language is everything is purposeful. So they have like, I don't know, X amount of characters in one circle, and each little thing is meant for something. So everything is so like well thought. And it is interesting to me, because I feel like it seems that the end result of the movie is that this language saved the world, because it helped people rethink the way things are done, and that in a sense is hopeful, and I kind of want aliens to come to our world now.
It's very inspiring in that whole concept that like language is that language has meaning that's so effective throughout that each word or pattern is out giving meaning, because so much language that people express can be effectively so much social grease to just have pleasantries to just go along with your day, and sometimes it can be very rare to just have like some real true meaning to come in out of the things people say over the course of the day. And so I do also find it inspiring that that when these aliens say something, they mean it, and by it can be so vast for like what a human perception could be.
And that we have the potential to rise to it.
Right? That's very inspiring as well.
So do you think we can rise to it?
Oh, I'm a fan of both science fiction and science to science, so I definitely feel that way. I mean, you basically look at just the medium that we're broadcasting right now, and this is something that even Star Trek couldn't conceive of it, and yet we're living in that world right now. That's a whole case, and like through all the experiences that people can have over on the internet, this leads to like just whole new ways of understanding that we never even thought possible before. So we're already doing that, I think.
So in terms of films and movies, do you think they have the power to change the world? I love asking these questions.
I think they have the power to make us question ourselves.
Okay.
And in questioning ourselves, we examine our culture and we reflect upon ourselves. And do we like what we see? Do we, or does it provide something that we can aspire to?
There's a really wonderful quote from a great band called The, which was, if you can't change the world, change yourself.
Yeah.
I really like how what Mary said on that, and because I'm very much in agreement on that. Like, I don't think movies can change the world in a global sense or like in a big societal sense, but they can change individuals' perception. They can change individual people's perspective and give things an increased level of importance. And if enough of them happen to feel that way or get that perspective, then the world does change. There's some like 100th monkey thing where we're finally like society almost like seems to flip a switch. I kind of feel in a lot of cases like society can go on and on thinking a certain way, and then suddenly like a perspective can go and change. And I think it's just enough for a critical amount of people.
Yeah.
And movies and art and science fiction can go and help people make those changes.
That's true.
And science too.
For sure.
Dave, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, just what they said. Really, our films are a reflection of society. So, you gain perspective that you may not have had before.
Yeah.
I don't really have a whole lot to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's what's exciting about science fiction. Sometimes it can be freaking scary, like Ex Machina, and I'm like, oh shit, we're dead. But no, I mean, like this movie.
One possible outcome.
But this movie, I'm like, oh, there's hope for this world. But yeah, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about this film is very amazingly visual. I mean, one with the language. But also just, I gotta say that initial part where they're rising into the whatever that is, and then they kind of get flipped over. It kind of made me think of Space Odyssey a bit.
Yes.
A little bit, just how they suddenly everything was just changed, like how they were walking and all that, and
that was a really cool move that the movie does, because just for the same reason that the space scenes in the middle of 2001, they you have someone standing like this, then you have another person standing like this right next to him.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah.
And the result when you're watching this stuff is that you get this sense that people are uprooted. They literally don't have they literally don't know where to stand on things, right? So when they're traveling up in that elevator and they suddenly switch positions, it's kind of doing in geometry terms and gravity terms what the whole movie is doing in terms of time.
Exactly.
It's saying everyone needs to shift. It's time for a change, and something fundamentally different to your experience is happening.
That's something I noticed in the cinematography in the first half of the film. The very first shot is a rolling shot across her ceiling, and we see lines in the panels, and the first thing I think is linearity. And then when she's in the student union, I see the lines in the wood panels, and I notice that the chairs in the student union are perfectly square.
Wow,
Then
yeah.
outside there's a shot of a campus building, and it has perfectly aligned geometric windows. And so everything suggests to me linearity. And then in the scene after her daughter passes, it's the first time I see Louise walking along an arc. And that's the first time I think, okay, that we're at a point in this circle, and at some point we've got to come full circle in the time story. And I feel like we come to that full circle in the final scene when General Shang communicates with Louise. And but I noticed just lines and geometry everywhere in the first half of the film, and then when the aliens come, as Al said, everything is upended.
Right. So if you guys could see everything in your future, would you still do everything that you saw?
Just like I said, I'm not sure we have that kind of influence. Like, I think...
Wait, what do you mean?
I think it comes down to whether you believe like time is defined already, or if you can actually change it. And it depends on, what science fiction you choose to align with. But
Right.
I, at least from the movie's perspective, it doesn't feel to me like time can be changed. It's already happened. And so like the aliens show up because they're supposed to. And Louise has her child because that's what happened. She gave birth to a child that unfortunately died very young. And
Yeah, so that was my problem with the first time I saw it. I was like, why did you have a child if you knew it was going to die? And why did you just go along with everything? But then I was thinking, okay, she's thinking very differently now, like in terms of like time and her life. And whatever happened with, General Chang, and then with her daughter, like it's not like a linear thing, like you must do this and this and this because this is how I see it. Like everything's intersected, like everything comes together. It took me a long time, like I said, but there's a reason for every part that she saw and everything that happens. So she, I'm sure she deviates from other things in her life, but those main points, that's what, she realized she had to follow through with because it coincided with the other things. So.
Yeah, there's two ways you can go in it. One is to just be very nihilistic about it and just say, well, you'll do this or you'll do that, and it's already been dictated that it should happen. But you can also maybe look at it in, I think Amy Adams' character kind of ends up looking at it in a more purposeful way.
Yeah.
It's a sense of like, as in like the phrase, go with the flow. She may just realize that there is a reason for why she'll do the things she does, even if she knows that stuff is happening in advance. And so she's participating with how things happen in the space-time continuum. And it's like, and she realizes it's important for her to do this and move that. And ultimately, I think that's what the movie's kind of exploring is what does it mean to go and like, and it does this through the scientific principles, but it also gets you the whole feeling of things. Because, you can also like have a child who has an increased risk of a disease, for example, right? And yet sometimes you feel like you would want to take that risk. And maybe you feel that like maybe you feel the experiences that you'll get and the other people you'll get will be worth the pain that will still happen. You might feel might be inevitable. It's kind of a similar theme to like one of my favorite films is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And those characters, they're so have an idea of like whether that probably won't work, that a relationship probably won't work, but the fact that they go for it anyway is so inspiring, And I think this Arrival is kind of working on a similar kind of idea.
Right.
The idea between this kind of inevitability that you think will happen and how you feel you'll still try to persist in the midst of something like that,
And that's, bringing up Eternal Sunshine, that's a good example too, because you had the two characters that were sort of regretting their decisions, like, oh, maybe there were good times that I want to remember, and they're slowly being erased. So yeah, she could definitely have looked at it from that perspective as well.
I remember in the script, near the end, she says, "Knowing what the journey brings, I embrace it." And
There you go.
And
That's a good, yeah, that ties it up.
yeah, and that through her daughter's life, there's a richness and a love that's ineffable and inexplicable.
Yeah, there's just one line that Jeremy Renner says when she asks, what would you do if you could see the rest of your life? He's like, I'd be more honest. I love that line. It's just like, I don't know why, but I think there is some kind of truth, about all of that, so.
When you see the whole scope of things,
Right.
then it really leads, like, your attempts at deception or self-deception kind of seem so insignificant, right?
Right, exactly.
Yes.
It's really interesting. So we're closing up now. Did you guys have any final thoughts about the film you wanted to add?
For me, just how wonderfully multi-thematic and multi-layered this story is. It's a really rich story, and there are so many subtleties you can pull out of it each time you watch it. And also the interesting cinematography of the film with the different colorings and the emphasis on linearity.
Mm-hmm.
And just, for me, it was just a beautifully multi-themed story, really beautiful.
Awesome. Anything? You good? Okay.
I would just say that just two things is that I completely agree with Mary about the value of how the cinematography can use and express the themes of the movie, and that's something I actually never noticed in Arrival before, how like it starts off linear because you're thinking linear and then it gets more and more curved as your perspective changes. That's super, super cool. And the cinematography also enhances the mystery of these alien creatures and just how effervescent, I guess, is there, because like the circles look like this dark smoke or ink, right? And they express themselves through ink, and which is a great tying into writing and communication, right? And then also like how they emerge literally out of this fog like rectangle is also a super cool and a really compelling image, and it also harkens that like this I like this movie because it goes and aims for something that science fiction can do really, really well and uses the principles of science that we've like discovered and expands on it, but ties it into like human concerns and human dreams and ideals. And I think that's one of the great things that science fiction can do. And this is a very good example of science fiction that does that.
Right.
And I'll just finish by saying my only regret is that this didn't turn out to be a prequel to The Departed.
I don't really understand that, but you can explain it
It's
to
all
me
right.
later.
Totally not worth it.
So thanks for watching, and we'll see you for part 3. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Bye.
Thank you.